I have rebuilt 3 engines in my life. A 1988 Chevy 350 that belonged to my uncle and that I tore down on a Saturday in November 1993 in my father's driveway. Every part laid out on a tarp in the order, I removed it. Because my father told me once that if you can't put something back in the order you took it apart, you didn't understand what you were taking apart. An inline-6 from a 1972 Ford pickup that a man in my neighborhood was going to junk and that I bought from him for $300 and spent 4 months rebuilding in my garage over the winter of 2007, listening to late-night radio with my hands black to the wrist and completely at peace. And the engine in my own truck, a 2014 Ford F-250 dark green, which I rebuilt at 187,000 miles, not because it needed it yet, but because I wanted to know every piece of it before it gave me any trouble. That is the kind of man I am. I study things before they break. I have replaced 2 roofs and 1 load-bearing wall and a foundation crack in 1997 that a contractor quoted me at $11,000 and that I fixed in 11 days with a library book and a rented hydraulic jack. I raised 1 son largely on my own during years when his mother and I were traveling separate roads, and when showing up for a 12-year-old every single day was the most important engineering problem I had ever been handed. I am not a man who is easily unsettled, but I want to tell you about an envelope. My name is Douglas Hale. I am 58 years old. I live in a craftsman bungalow on Orchard Street in Knoxville, Tennessee. I am a facilities manager for the Knox County School District, which means I spend my days walking buildings with a clipboard and a radio, keeping ahead of what buildings need before they fail. I coach youth football for 9 years, linebackers specifically, because linebackers have to read the whole field before they move, and because I have always believed that kind of patience is a thing you can teach a person if you start when they are young enough to still think it is interesting. I drive the F-250 I mentioned, and I keep it clean, and I fill the tank before it hits a quarter because my father did that, and his father did that, and it is, as far as I am concerned, one of the small reliable habits that separate a man who is prepared from a man who is always catching up. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get settled, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. My father's name is Harold Gene Hale. He turned 80 years old on Saturday, March 7th of this year. He lives in a house on Hillside Road in Powell, Tennessee, 22 minutes north of Knoxville on a clear morning, a 2-story white colonial with dark green shutters and a detached garage big enough for 2 vehicles and a workbench, which is the most important room on the property as far as my father is concerned and always has been. He and my mother bought the house in 1974 for $41,000. They paid it off in 2003. My mother used to say my father paid off the mortgage the same way he did everything else. Quietly, ahead of schedule, and without making production of it. My mother's name was Ruth. She passed in October of 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from the first scan to the end, which is a kind of timeline that doesn't leave room for anything except presence. And my father was present every single day of it. He drove her to every appointment. He learned the names of every medication. He sat in the recliner beside her hospital bed in the final week and read to her from the same Louis L'Amour novels he had been reading aloud to her on Sunday evenings since 1978, because she had always liked the sound of his voice more than the stories themselves, and he knew that and kept reading. He did not fall apart when she died. He came home to Hillside Road. He kept the house. He kept the yard. He kept in church on Sundays and the hardware store on Wednesdays and to my house for dinner on the last Sunday of every month. He grieved in a way of men who were built before grief was something you were expected to perform publicly. He grieved privately, completely, and with the same dignity he brought to everything else. Harold Hale spent 34 years as a tool and die machinist at Holston Defense Corporation in Kingsport. He retired in 2008 with a Seiko watch and the handshake of a plant manager who told him, in front of about 30 colleagues, that in 34 years Harold Hale had never turned out a single piece of work that needed to be done over. My father thanked him, shook his hand, and went home and mowed the lawn. That story took him 3 sentences to tell me. He considered it a complete account. He has a 1971 Chevrolet C10 pickup in the garage, pale yellow, that my mother bought for him for their 10th anniversary. He keeps it running. He drives it on Saturday mornings, not far, just a back road around Powell, just enough. He says, to remind the truck it is still a truck. I have always thought he was also reminding himself of something, though I have never asked him what. I need to tell you about Sandra now, and I am going to be fair about it the way I am always fair about things, because fairness is a discipline and not a feeling, and I have found over 58 years that the men who are only fair when it is easy for them are not actually fair men. Sandra is my wife of 14 years. She is 52, works as a senior event coordinator for a downtown Knoxville hotel, and she is genuinely excellent at what she does. She is organized in a way that I have always respected, even when I found it impersonal. She keeps a calendar that would make a logistics engineer feel humbled. She remembers every client preference, every venue contact, every room configuration and catering order and audio-visual requirement for every event she has overseen in 11 years. She is a professional in the truest sense of the word, meaning that she brings the same quality to her work regardless of how she feels about it, and she has built a career on that consistency. I am not telling you this to make her sympathetic. I am telling you this because I want you to understand exactly what kind of person made the choices that she made and why those choices meant what they meant. Sandra is not a forgetful woman. She does not miss things by accident. When she missed things in our marriage, she missed them by calculation, and the difference between those two is the difference between a crack in a foundation and a door someone deliberately left open. The birthday dinner had been on the shared calendar since January 14th. I remember putting it there. I typed the words, Dad's 80th, Hillside Road, non-negotiable. I do not use that word often on a calendar. In 14 years, I had used it exactly twice. Once for my son Marcus's college graduation in 2022. Once for this. Sandra had seen it. She confirmed she'd seen it when we talked to the guest list in early February, sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, going through who was coming and what we were bringing and whether my uncle Gary needed a hotel, which he did not because he was staying at the house with my father the way he always did when he came down from Louisville. That conversation had been specific, logistical, the kind Sandra was good at. She had been engaged. She had helped plan it. On Thursday, March 5th, she came into the kitchen at 7:20 in the evening while I was at the table with my second cup of coffee, a 2019 Cuisinart that I have had for arguments with myself about replacing and have not, because it works and because I am not a man who gets rid of things at work. And she stood at the counter with her phone in her hand, and she told me about the conflict. A client's annual fundraising gala had been rescheduled. Black tie event. She was a coordinator of record. She had known about the conflict, she said, for about 3 weeks. She tried to find a way around it and couldn't. She was sorry. I put my coffee down. 3 weeks. I heard that number and I set it aside, the way you set a measurement aside when you are not ready to act on it, but you know you will need it later. Sandra, I said, my dad's 80th birthday. I know, she said. She had the expression she used when she had already decided something and was in the process of informing me. Not cruel, not cold, the specific expression of a woman who had weighed two things and resolved the question before she walked into the room. I'm sorry. I genuinely can't hand this off. She set the phone face down on the counter. He'll have a wonderful evening. You'll all be together. I want you to understand how she meant that. She was not dismissing my father. She did not dislike him. Not exactly. What she had done, over 14 years, in ways small and accumulating, was to place my family, my father, my son in his younger years, the events, occasions that mattered to the people I came from, in a secondary category of obligation. Not worthless. Just lower. Just the kind of thing that, when something else pressed, could absorb the absence. She had been right about that for a long time. I had let her be right. I had managed the gaps, smoothed things over, explained her way to my father and to my son with particular quiet efficiency, a man who had decided that keeping the peace was the same thing as having peace. I had been wrong about that for 14 years. I was done being wrong about it. I just wasn't ready to say so yet. I said, all right. I picked up my coffee. I went back to what I was reading. Sandra went back to her home office. Neither of us said anything else. March 7th. Cold and clear, the kind of early Tennessee spring day that can't fully commit. I drove up to Powell in the F, 250 at 4:10 in the afternoon. A Dutch oven of pot roast on the back seat. My contribution as designated by my father 6 weeks prior, when he said bring the pot roast. Douglas, you do it right, which is the most direct compliment Harold Hale has ever given me about my cooking, in which I store carefully. My Uncle Gary's rental car was already in the driveway. Through the front window I could see the kitchen light, my father's silhouette moving between the counter and the stove, unhurried, deliberate, the way he moved through every task in his life. I stood on the porch for a moment before I knocked. The cold air smelled like coming rain. I could hear something on the radio inside. Faint, something with a piano. I stood there and I looked at the front door of the house where I had grown up, and I made a decision that I will tell you about in a moment. A quiet decision, the kind that doesn't announce itself. And then I knocked. The evening was complete. That is the word I keep coming back to. Complete. My Uncle Gary, 76 years old, 5 hours from Louisville, full of his stories and his laugh that was too big for any room he'd ever been in, present and whole and delighted to be there. My cousin Patrice and her husband from Cleveland. Their 2 kids at 12 and 9 asking my father 40 minutes of questions about the C-10 that kept him more animated than I had seen him in 2 years. My father, at the head of the table, sharp and present, telling the story about the time he and Gary had tried to drive from Kingsport to Atlanta in a 1964 Rambler in January and made it as far as Chattanooga before the heater failed. A story I have heard 11 times and which remains a good story, and which Gary interrupted 4 times with corrections that my father accepted with the patient generosity of a man who understood that his brother's version of the story was also true, just, different. Sandra's absence was the only note that did not belong in the room. My father had set the table for the people who came. He did not remove the chair to my right or comment on it, or let his eyes rest on it in a way that required me to respond. He simply ran the evening as if it were exactly the evening it was supposed to be, which I now understood it was exactly what it was supposed to be. He had known that before any of us sat down. By 9:15 the cousins were in the living room with their kids, and Gary was doing the dishes without being asked, which is something Gary has done at every family gathering for as long as I can remember, and my father and I were at the kitchen table with our coffee, talking about nothing particular, the garden plan for spring. A drainage issue on the east side of the property he'd noticed after the February rains. The C-10's carburetor, which had developed a stumble at idle that he suspected was a needle valve but hadn't pulled apart yet. We talked the way we always talked, without urgency, the radio on the shelf filling the quiet between sentences. At 9:47, everyone had gone or gone to bed, and I put on my jacket in the front hallway and picked up my keys, and my father walked me to the door. He looked like a man who had had exactly the birthday he wanted. He looked in the specific way that 80 years of living well produces, entirely at peace. And then he reached into the inside pocket of his cardigan, and he produced an envelope, white, standard size, my name on the front in his machinist's handwriting. Every letter formed with the same deliberate care he gave to every measurement he ever took. He held it out. "Here," he said, "open it when you're ready." No rush. I took it. I looked at him. He put his hand on my shoulder once. "Drive safe, son." He went back inside. I stood on the porch of the house on Hillside Road for what was probably 90 seconds. The cold had sharpened since the afternoon. Down the street, a dog barked once and went quiet. I could still hear the radio through the front window. I walked to the truck. I put the envelope in my inside jacket pocket. I drove home, and I did not open it. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it and drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to tell you why I waited 4 days, because it is not what you might think. It was not fear. I knew the envelope was not going to contain bad news about my father's health or his finances, or anything that required bracing for. Harold Hale does not deliver bad news in envelopes handed at the end of birthday dinners. What I understood, from the weight of his handwriting on the outside, and the weight of his hand on my shoulder, and the specific calm in his voice, when he said, "Open it when you're ready," was that whatever was inside was something he had decided, not recently, not in response to the evening. Something he had been working toward for a long time, in the way he worked toward everything, and that was now complete, and that he wanted me to have when I was in the right frame of mind to receive it properly. I was not in that frame of mind on Saturday night. I was still too close to the empty chair. Sunday, I coached my morning session. 13 and 14-year-olds learning to read formations before the snap, learning to be still when everything in their bodies wanted to move. I had the envelope in my jacket on the sideline bench. One of my kids, a boy named Marcus Tull, who has the best instincts of any linebacker I have ever coached at any age, glanced at my jacket midway through drills and asked about the envelope he could see sticking out. For my dad, I told him he just turned 80. Marcus thought about that with the seriousness of a 13-year-old who occasionally surprised you. That's a long time, he said. It is, I said. Go line up. He went. I watched him take his position. And I thought about my father in the garage in 1981, showing me how to use a torque wrench, how he had made me do it wrong 3 times on purpose. So I would know in my hands what wrong felt like before I learned what right felt like. You have to know both, he had said. Otherwise, right is just luck. I thought about the envelope. I decided I still wasn't ready. Monday and Tuesday I carried it. I went to work both days, walked my buildings, fixed a boiler relay at Farragut Middle School on Monday afternoon that had been on my list for 2 weeks, replaced a section of acoustic ceiling tile at a district office on Tuesday morning that had been water damaged since January. I found the work, as I always did, calming in the specific way that problems with solutions are calming. A building tells you what it needs. You listen. You fix it. There's an honesty to that which I have always found steadying. Sandra did not know the envelope existed. She did not ask about the birthday dinner in any specific way. How was it? She said Monday evening. Good, I said. She nodded. That was the whole conversation. I am not telling you that to suggest she was heartless. I am telling you that to show you where we were by that point in 14 years of marriage. We had the same 10 conversations on rotation, and we both knew it, and neither of us had said so yet. Wednesday morning, March 11th. I pulled into the district office parking lot at 6:51 in the morning, 8 minutes before I needed to be inside. The lot was mostly empty. The engine ticked in the cold. I sat in the truck with the heat running low, and I took the envelope out of my jacket pocket, and I opened it. A single sheet of paper, folded once. The fold was sharp. My father had used a ruler or a bone folder, something with an edge, because the crease was mathematically straight in a way that fingers alone do not produce. The date at the top, February 4th. He had written it 5 weeks before the birthday. 7 weeks before I was sitting in that truck reading it. He had been carrying this, folded and sealed, waiting for the right moment, for 7 weeks. I want to read you what he wrote as closely as I can to exactly how he wrote it. He said he had been doing some thinking, not recent thinking. He underlined those words, a single clean line under not recent, which in Harold Hale's vocabulary is the equivalent of anyone else saying I have been living with this for years. He said he had been watching and considering things in a quiet way since my mother passed. He said he had spoken with a man named Robert Kessler, an estate attorney in Kingsport with 30 years of practice, in December, and that they had worked through his wishes carefully over 2 meetings, and that the documents had been finalized and signed on January 19th and recorded with the county on January 23rd. He said the house on Hillside Road, clear title, fully paid, was going to me. The C-10 was going to me. The savings accounts, both of them, the household account and the account my mother had started in 1988 with $500, and an appointment she made herself at a Merrill Lynch office in Kingsport because she had decided that a machinist's pension was not going to be the whole plan. Those were going to me. The investment portfolio, that account had grown into over 31 years of patient, undramatic contributions, was going to me. Copies of everything were held by Robert Kessler and by a fireproof lockbox in his bedroom closet. Combination 14-19-74. The month and year they'd moved to Hillside Road, which he had given me once before and which I had written in the back of a notebook I kept in my home office and had never needed to use. The last paragraph was 4 sentences. I have them memorized. I will have them memorized until I die. He wrote, "Your mother and I built this across 50 years of showing up for each other and for you. That is what it means, all of it. The house, the truck, the money, every piece of it. It belongs with someone who understands what building together actually means. I have watched you long enough to know that is you, and I have watched long enough to know other things too. That was all. I sat in the parking lot of the Knox County District Office, and I read it twice, slowly, and then I sat on the passenger seat, and I looked out the windshield at the empty parking lot and the gray March sky, and I let it land, just let it land. I did not make it smaller than it was. I did not manage it. I sat in that truck with my engine ticking and my heat running low, and I let myself feel completely and without hurrying past it what it meant that my father had written those words in February, weeks before a birthday dinner, because he had already understood what the evening was going to tell me about my own life, and he wanted me to have something in my pocket when I walked out the door. My eyes were wet. I want to be honest about that. I am a man who was raised by Harold Gene Hale, and I know how to be still with something large. But I was sitting in a truck on a Wednesday morning, holding 4 sentences that my father had written with a ruler straight fold and a 7-week wait, and my eyes were wet, and I am not going to pretend they weren't. I sat there until 7:06, 15 minutes. Then I put the letter back in the envelope, put the envelope in my inside pocket, and went to work. I fixed a stuck emergency exit bar at Lincoln Park Elementary that morning. I walked the roof at the district maintenance facility in the afternoon, checking the flashing around 3 HVAC units that had been flagged in a February inspection. I did my work. I did it right. That is what you do. That evening, Friday the 13th, Sandra and I had the conversation. She came home at 6:20, poured herself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table across from me, and said she wanted to talk about the birthday dinner. She wanted to explain more about the event conflict, the client relationship, the money involved, the professional risk of handing it off. She had been carrying this, she said, and she wanted me to understand the position she had been in. I let her say all of it, every word. I am a patient man. I coached linebackers for 9 years, and the first thing you teach a linebacker is that moving before you understand what is happening is worse than waiting. You watch, you read, then you move once correctly. When she finished, I said, Sandra, when did you decide you weren't coming? Not when you told me. When did you actually decide? She was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. I had the conflict on my calendar since February 14th. She said, 3 weeks, I said. She looked at her wine glass. You knew for 3 weeks, I said, and you decided the dinner could absorb your absence, that my father would understand, that I would handle it. I picked up my coffee. That last part was true. I did handle it. I handled every gap in this marriage. What I am telling you, Sandra, is that I am done handling it. She looked at me the way people look at a sentence that arrived differently than they expected, measured, present, trying to locate the threat. What does that mean? She said. It means what I said. I stood up and rinsed my mug and set it on the rack the way I always did. I have a meeting in Kingsport on Tuesday, I said. I'll be back by 5. I got my jacket from the hook. I walked out to the F-250 and I drove to the parking lot of the Lutheran Church on Laurel Avenue, for blocks away, and I sat with the engine off and the cold coming in, and I stayed there for 9 minutes until everything in my chest had settled into the specific stillness that is not emptiness but resolution. Then I called Robert Kessler's office and left a message asking to confirm Tuesday's appointment. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. You open it? He said before hello. Wednesday morning, I said. He made a small sound. Not a laugh. Warmer than silence. How are you? I'm all right, I said. I'm good, actually. I think I'm good. He waited. My father was always good at waiting. I'm going to see Kessler Tuesday, I said. Sharp man, my father said. Careful. Doesn't use extra words. I thought about telling him about the conversation with Sandra. I decided he already knew what he needed to know. He had known it since February 4th. Dad, I said, the last thing you wrote. I have watched long enough to know other things too. He was quiet for a moment. I just wanted you to know that I know. He said simply, that was all. We talked for another few minutes about the carburetor on the C10, which he had confirmed was a needle valve, and which he had fixed himself on Tuesday with a kit from the parts store, and which was running correctly. He sounded satisfied about it in the way he sounded satisfied about everything he fixed. We hung up at 8:42. He hung up first. Robert Kessler's office was on Broad Street in Kingsport, a second-floor suite above an insurance agency. reached by a staircase with a wood banister that someone had kept in good repair for what looked like 60 years. His assistant, a woman named Cheryl Bunn, had confirmed my Tuesday 2 o'clock appointment on Thursday morning when I called. She had a calm, organized voice, the voice of a person who had worked for a careful man long enough to become careful herself. Kessler himself was exactly what my father had described. Gray at the temples, deliberate in his movements, with an office that was organized in a way that only decades of practice produces. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary, every shelf and drawer exactly where it needed to be. He shook my hand, offered coffee, poured 2 cups from a machine behind his desk without asking how I took mine, and when I told him black, he nodded as if that confirmed something. He walked me through the documents in the order they were executed: estate transfer instruments, title documents for the house and the vehicle, account transfer authorizations, the investment portfolio summary with the Merrill Lynch account history going back to 1988. He explained each section in plain language without condescension and answered my 4 questions with precision of a man who did not add words to answers that were already complete. The net value of the estate, he told me, was just under $417,000, not counting the house, which had been assessed at $289,000 in January and was owned free and clear. Total value of assets transferring to me upon my father's death, or sooner if my father chose to execute the living transfer provisions he had included, approximately $706,000. Specific, odd, the exact number of 50 years of careful living. Nothing about that number surprised me. What it did was make concrete, in a way that I had understood abstractly but not numerically, what Harold and Ruth Hale had built on a machinist's salary and a schoolteacher's income and 31 years of $500 contributions to a Merrill Lynch account. They had built it the same way my father built everything. Measured, patient, never more complicated than it needed to be. When Kessler stood to shake my hand at 2:53, he said, "Your father is a thorough man, Mr. Hale." "He always has been," I said. He walked me to the door of his office. The staircase banister was solid under my hand going down. I was on the road south to Knoxville by 3:07. The afternoon light was coming in flat and gold off the ridge lines, the kind of light that only happens in Tennessee in mid-March, not quite spring, the hills holding their color at the edge of green. I drove in the F-250 with the window cracked 2 inches the way I did on this stretch of road, the cold air mixing with the truck's heat, the radio on low, an old country station my father listened to, which I had started keeping on in the truck sometime in the last year, without making a conscious decision to do it. Sandra and I separated formally in June. I did not make a speech. I did not need to. She knew. The conversation at the kitchen table on a Friday in March had been, as it turned out, enough of a conversation for both of us. Our attorney, a woman named Patricia Searle with 26 years of practice on Gay Street in downtown Knoxville, processed the separation and the divorce with the efficient, decent quality of someone who has seen this particular kind of ending many times and treats each one with the respect it deserves. Sandra kept the CRV and the downtown apartment she'd found in April. I kept the house on Orchard Street in the F-250 and the carburetor kit I bought to fix the idle stumble in my truck that turned out to be the same problem as the C10. Different engine, same cause, which my father pointed out when I described it to him in April, and which made us both laugh in the way you laugh at things that are not funny but are honest. My son Marcus is 24 now. He drove up from Nashville the first weekend after Sandra moved out, didn't ask questions, helped me rehang the gutters on the back of the house that had been pulling away from a fascia since November. We worked 4 hours on ladders in late June heat and fixed it right and ate bad pizza on the back porch after. And he went back to Nashville Sunday afternoon, and I watched his car turn off Orchard Street. And I thought that I had not done everything right in my life, but I had done that right, and it was enough, and it was more than enough. My father still drives the C10 on Saturday mornings. I still drive up the Hillside Road on Sunday afternoons. We make coffee and sit on the back porch when the weather allows and at the kitchen table when it doesn't, and we talk about the garden and the truck and the buildings I am keeping upright and the linebackers I am teaching to be still. And I leave at dusk, and he waves from the porch the way he has waved from that porch since I was old enough to drive away from it. One hand, steady, unhurried. The envelope is in the top drawer of my desk at home. I did not throw it away. I did not frame it or put it somewhere ceremonial. It is in the top drawer with my good pens and the combination to the gun safe and the notebook where I wrote down the combination to his lockbox in 2019. It is ordinary and it is permanent, and I do not need to take it out and read it because I have it memorized, the fold and the handwriting and the four senses of the last paragraph. And I have come to understand that the most precise thing Harold Gene Hale ever made was not a piece of tool and die work or a foundation on Hillside Road or a yellow 1971 C10 kept running for 50 years. It was a sentence he wrote in February to hand to his son in March, on the night that told him everything he needed to know about what his son was going to need. I have watched long enough to know other things too. I have spent 58 years trying to become the kind of man who deserves to receive a sentence like that, a sealed envelope, for days in a jacket pocket, and a father who had already measured twice and knew exactly when to cut. Some things are built with tools. Some things are built with time. The difference between a man who builds and a man who waits for someone else to do it is the same difference my father taught me with a torque wrench in 1981. You have to know what wrong feels like in your hands before you can trust yourself to know when you've got it right. I've got it right. I know I do. Harold Hale told me so, in his handwriting, with a ruler straight fold, dated February 4th, 7 weeks before I was ready to hear it. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I will see you on the next one.